So today, we're going to tackle a real paradox, the Constitution of the United Kingdom. Now, it's one of the oldest and most influential in the entire world. But here's the catch. If you actually tried to find it, you couldn't, because in a way, it doesn't really exist in any one single place. I mean, that's a genuine riddle, right? Most countries have a foundational document, a rule book that says this is how we work. But the UK, it doesn't have one. So what on earth is holding it all together?
Okay, so first things first, let's get a key difference straight. Most constitutions are what we call codified. Think of the USA. Everything is right there in one big master document. But the UK's is uncodified, and that means its rules are pulled from a whole bunch of different places. It's not that there aren't any rules, it's just that they're scattered all over the shop.
So to really get our heads around this, we're not just going to study it. Nope, we're going to try and build it ourselves. I want you to imagine we have something we'll call a constitutional bag. Our mission is to find all the different pieces that make up the UK's rulebook and pop them inside. And by the end, we'll have a much clearer picture of what this unwritten system is actually made of.
So what goes in first? The sources. Think of these as the raw ingredients. You've got the most obvious ones, Acts of Parliament. These are the actual laws made by politicians. But just as important is something called common law, which is basically built up over hundreds of years from judges' decisions in courtrooms. And then you get the really unusual ingredient, conventions. These are powerful, unwritten traditions. They aren't technically laws, but everyone agrees they're absolutely essential for how the whole system works.
Okay, next up in the bag, we need the principles. These are kind of like the instructions for how to use all those sources. The biggest one, the real heavyweight champion, is parliamentary sovereignty. This basically says Parliament is the top dog. It can make or unmake any law it wants. But that incredible power is balanced by the rule of law. And that's the absolute bedrock idea that no one, not even the government, is above the law. And finally, you've got the separation of powers, which acts like a referee, making sure the government, Parliament, and the courts all stay in their own lanes and don't overstep.
All right, so our bag is starting to get full, but here is the most crucial point of all. This collection of rules and ideas isn't locked away in a museum display case. It's alive. It is constantly changing. And you can literally see that change happening across centuries of history. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Magna Carta in 1215. That's the first time anyone really put limits on the monarch's power. And it stretches all the way to the Human Rights Act, almost 800 years later. Every single one of these points on the timeline was a moment where the fundamental rules of the country shifted, sometimes in a really big way. It's a story of constant, slow-burn evolution. But get this, the Constitution doesn't just change over time, it also changes depending on where you are. Through this process called devolution, the central UK Parliament in London has handed over some pretty significant lawmaking powers to new parliaments and assemblies in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And you've seen the real-world effect of this yourself, probably without even realizing it. Remember during the pandemic, the rules for things like wearing masks or social distancing could be totally different if you were in England versus, say, Scotland or Wales. That wasn't just confusion, that was the Constitution in action. That was devolution, with each nation making its own laws on these important issues. Now, I know this can all seem a little bit abstract. Rules, principles, devolution, who cares? Well, these constitutional arrangements have a massive, massive impact on people's real lives. Let's look at a couple of really powerful examples. I'm going to ask you a pretty startling question. Just over 100 years ago, in 1913, was a woman legally considered a person? Well, in a very specific legal context, the answer the courts gave was no. So here's the story. A woman named Gwyneth Bebb, who was brilliant, she'd gotten top marks in her law studies at Oxford, was told she couldn't become a lawyer. Why? Because the law said only a person could, and the court decided that didn't include women. Now, her legal challenge actually failed, but it created such an uproar that it forced Parliament to act. They passed a brand new law that changed the definition and finally opened up the legal profession to women. It's an incredible example of how one person's fight can literally force this flexible constitution to evolve. But that flexibility, it has a darker side. After World War II, people from all over the Commonwealth were invited to come to the UK to help rebuild. And the law was crystal clear. As this quote shows, when they arrived, they were automatically British subjects, with the full right to live and work here forever. But then, in 1971, Parliament passed a new law. And because of that huge principle, parliamentary sovereignty, this new act simply overrode the old rules.
Decades later, this led directly to the Windrush scandal, where people like Anthony Brown, who'd lived in the UK his entire life since he was a kid, were suddenly and wrongly told they were illegal immigrants. So you see, the very same flexibility that can expand rights can also lead to absolutely devastating consequences for people.
So, where does all of this leave us now? Well, if we've learned anything, it's that our constitutional bag is never, ever finished. There is always something new being added, something being taken out, or something being rearranged.
Ultimately, you can't think of the UK Constitution as a thing. It's a process. It's this continuous living story that's been shaped by centuries of history, the unique geography of its four nations, and, as we've seen, the very real struggles and triumphs of the people who live under its rules.
And so, we're left with this huge final question. Is this unique, unwritten system a brilliant, flexible tradition that can adapt to anything the world throws at it? Or is its lack of clear, fixed rules actually a recipe for chaos and injustice? And maybe the most important question of all is, what goes in the UK's constitutional bag next?